you doing, everybody? This is Ken Miller, and we are here with the National Academy of Sports Medicine. And when I say we, I mean myself out here in Alameda, California, and my good buddy, Tony Ambler-Wright, out there in Atlanta, Georgia. How you doing, Tony?
Hey, Ken, I'm doing great, man. Happy to be back on with you. We've had a couple-week hiatus, so I'm excited about today, and hope everybody listening in is excited as well. Joining you from sunny Atlanta, Georgia right now. And yeah, thanks so much for tuning in. And what is this, our 6th episode in our Return to Performance series?
Number 6, and those first 5 went by really, really fast. But when I was watching our hip complex video the other day, and we went over a lot of stuff, and a lot of content between the foot and ankle, the knee, hip complex, shoulder complex, as well as just the overview. So a lot of great things that you and I have had a chance to sit and talk about. But I think as we get into this 6th episode and all the way to number 10, if we make references to some of the other videos or how to address the other parts of the body, foot, ankle, knee, hip, shoulder, you just as easy as clicking on some of the previous videos. So just a quick little bit of information on that one. On May 6th, we did just the overview. Actually, the foot and ankle on May 6th, we had the knee on May 13th, and we had the hip complex on the 20th of May, and then the shoulder complex was the last one that we did. So yeah, so just to kind of tune up on some things and what we've covered and what we can address with court sports, which is why we're here today. I was watching the hip video and see what else we can tee off of or kind of just springboard off of that when it comes to the reconditioning part. But I'm really excited for today, just because nothing gets me excited more about these webinars, Tony, than to hear you talk about and share your experience when it comes to the athletes, some of the high-level athletes that you've had to work with on this. So
likewise, buddy.
Yeah.
Should be a good time.
Yeah, this will be. So if you're watching also, don't be shy. Go ahead and type in your questions on the comments, and at the end, we're trying to save the last 10 to 15 minutes of this webinar for questions, so we can address things as you guys may need, or things that you've had questions on but didn't have the resources, or have somebody that you can ask these questions towards, or if it just sparks a thought on clients that you might be working with, not just volleyball players or basketball players, but anybody who's active that might resemble the court sport environment that we're talking about. So Tony, let's open up with return to performance. And again, if we talk more about one sport versus the other, like basketball, or this could be volleyball, and we talked about badminton, anything that kind of looks like what you might do on a court. So just a general description of the activity might be something where, like basketball, you're running, stopping, jumping. So there's a lot of dynamics that goes into the sport of basketball, as it does volleyball for that matter. So I've had a chance to work with some collegiate volleyball players in my past, and it's been it's one of those things. And when we talk about court sports, is that there is a lot going on. So when it comes to getting an athlete, or whether they're professional, collegiate, or recreational, and I do work with junior high and high school kids as well. The source of issues that can contribute to an injury can come from anywhere, right? Or it can take one thing, whether it was an acute injury, let's say an ankle sprain, it affects everything that person does, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that, speaking of an ankle sprain, there's a variety of mechanisms for that, but, and we'll get into this when it comes to the reconditioning element, specifically for basketball, but the amount of contact that's involved, in addition to all the other things that you made mention of.
Right. So let's talk about injury in sport now. Just kind of step back a little bit when it comes to return to performance, and something that we might have said or might have emphasized in one of our earlier webinars, the fact that especially an athlete, higher level athlete, they may be identified as the injury, right? So how many times, Tony, have you talk to somebody and you're talking about a player that might have played collegiately or professionally like years ago, and it's like, oh yeah, you remember that one running back or that one basketball player? What was it that he suffered? Was it hamstring, or what took him out that year? Was it low back? Was it his Achilles? So what happens when you're working with athletes is that they become, right, their doctor's report. Like they become their MRI, they become their X-ray, they become, when you're watching someone get walked off the court and back into the locker room, you're watching how they're carted off or how they're walked off. And it's like, oh, already people are diagnosing and figuring out, okay, well, it's got to be his ACL. It's got to be, something's wrong with his hip. So I think the one thing about return to performance just overall is that the athlete is not the injury, right? Because if we start to pigeonhole, when we start to pigeonhole or start to categorize an athlete, even though it's been diagnosed, it's that they become that thing, right? So if it's a low back issue, now you start to focus on the low back or the knee or the foot and ankle. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is because as we get into the assessment process, you start to shut out other things, right? So if it winds up being a low back or hip issue, you start to focus on that area, right? And you stop and you put your blinders on, and you start to neglect other things that can be addressed as far as, okay, what's it going to take for this athlete to get better? What's it going to take for this person to come back more resilient when it comes to the sport that they're trying to take a hold of? So when we talk about the assessment process and what it takes for us as fitness professionals, strength conditioning coaches to get a player back onto the court, and again, in the context of return to performance, there's something that took somebody out of this sport, that took them off the playing field or off the court, and it's our job to get them back on. So what are your thoughts on that, Tony? Because in the realm of working with professional sports as you have, you certainly, that winds up being the discussion, when you're talking to the coach or the athletic trainer or the physical therapist for the team and things like that. So I just wanted to get your perspective on that whole concept.
Sure. Well, as far as the assessments are concerned, when discussing the player's return to performance status with the coaching staff, player development, you have to understand what are their benchmarks for success. What are the things that they are looking for from the athlete that would signify that they are ready to return to full performance. But then on the strength and conditioning, sports medicine side, there are a battery of assessments that can be done to establish baselines early on in the return to performance process, and then that you can re-measure against later on as that athlete's getting closer and closer to getting back on the court. And so I think one, you just have to understand, what are the expectations of the athlete? What are the expectations of the coaching staff that would indicate that they're satisfied with where the athlete is in order to return to playing and return to performance. And then how can you layer in some of the more objective assessments that you would use to determine their eligibility or their status when it comes to returning to performance. And if there's a disparity there, what then needs to happen in order to close that gap? And so, we talked as we went through each of our episodes week by week for different parts of the body, ankles, knees, low back, shoulders. We discussed a variety of different assessments that could be utilized in order to help you determine, help the athlete determine, if they're ready and where they're at in their program to come back. But when we just look at some of those assessments, we'll revisit those: the overhead squat, single leg squat, You've got the depth jump or landing error scoring system assessments, more dynamic assessments. You got vertical jump. You've got a variety of different agility assessments. When it comes to lower extremity injuries in particular, you've got your hop series where you can do triple hops for distance, single leg hops for distance, crossover hops. And so again, revisit some of the previous episodes if you want a little more information on that. We've got our reactive assessments like shark skill tests, our lower extremity functional test if you're looking at some agility stuff. And then in the upper extremity, we've got our Davies assessment. And then really any other assessments that you feel would be relevant or that the coaching staff feels would be relevant to get that athlete back. So whether it's a conditioning protocol, or anything else. I mean, ultimately, you can't manage what you don't measure, but you want to make sure that there's a sound rationale behind what it is that you're assessing and testing for. And so with all of these, particularly with the hops, if you're doing power-based testing like a single leg vertical, if you're doing the reactive or agility testing, you want to see improvement over time. And then one of the key benchmarks that's looked at is symmetry between the uninvolved leg and the involved leg as the athlete's coming back. The benchmark typically for that is you want to get them to within 10% or less of each other as it relates to performance during those particular assessments. So, if there's a particular distance that's achieved, you want the involved side to be within 10% of the uninvolved side. If there's a particular time involved, you want the involved side to be within 10% of the uninvolved side. So those are some of the key things to look at. And, if you get within that 10% symmetry, then, things are looking relatively good as it relates to that individual being ready to get back in and stepping up and ramping up their level of activity.
Right. And, the thing about the assessment process is that, sometimes if you're working with an organization which you have, or alongside as a contractor, sometimes it's got to be a little bit of a sales job to create that little buy-in on some of the things that you're doing. And one of the things that I found successful with that is taking video or even still pictures if I had to on, okay, if it's a compromised left leg or something like, knee, and you're doing the hop to land, not just the distance, but also if I were to film how they got there. So even if they got within that 10% that you mentioned, because, we do need that symmetry, because if they're going to load right, chances are they're going to try load left. If they can't do one or the other, one side's going to take the hit. So if I'm watching, if they get 20 yards on one, 20 yards or 19 yards on the other, well within that 10%. But if they got there because they had an excessive forward lean, or the knee was collapsing, or they just dropped the hip on every time they landed, then, qualitatively, I wanted to express that to the coaches or the athletic trainer or the physical therapist, like, yeah, he's meeting your metrics. However, it doesn't mean that, he's ready to go. Not that I'm trying to hold a player back, because that's the last thing that I want. But when the question comes up, is this person ready for full integration into practice, into competition? Can I put them on? Well, if I'm looking at 19 and 20, close numbers, and that's not bad for them from coming back from injury or taking a little bit of a hiatus. However, if we're using it as, let's say, I hate to use the word predictive, because there's no way you can predict whether or not someone's gonna get injured or re-injured, but we know that if someone moves more efficiently, statistically, when it comes to the possibility of getting hurt, the less compensations, the less likely something's going to happen. Although there's plenty of people that, have been playing or competing for 20 or some years between high level and recreational that never get hurt, right? But you watch them during a compensate or watch their compensations during an assessment. You're like, how is this guy walking around without pain? Just because their feet are pointing one way, their knees are coming in, they're all full of compensation, but nothing ever happens. But the fact that if we bring up some points, with what we would call the kinetic chain checkpoints, and if any one of those points are erratic, zigging and zagging one way or the other, we can use those as part of our process, because as we build in their self-care program, their corrective exercise strategy, something that they're going to do in addition to basketball or volleyball, the battery of assessments that you listed off, Tony, were can be looked at as, okay, not just how far, how fast, but how.
Yeah. How well. Yeah.
Yeah. So especially with this sports, the hops, jumps, the depth jump, the last test, those have been very impactful when it comes to how I decide, or not just my decision making process, but the information I decide to share with the coaches from that vantage point. So when it comes to the assessments, you can take those all collectively as data points, right? No assessment in and of itself is going to weigh heavily, when it comes to weighs more than another when it comes to how we put a program together, right? It's a collective strategy. Okay, so if you look at, how are the different ways that we're challenging the hip? What are the different ways we're challenging the foot and ankle? And now we can look at and even kind of hone the corrective strategy or the reconditioning plan, if you will, based on, okay, he does well going forward, but lateral, not so much, right? So when we talk about these different assessments, especially when we talk about the left test, where you're taking somebody through forward, lateral, rotational, backward motions, something like that has been a pretty impactful assessment if I were to weigh any assessment more than the others. When it comes to assessments, so do you have a go-to that you might look forward to, or that you look to give you the most information, or how you decide where to bring somebody or how to program design for an athlete?
No, I think everything we just listed, but the left is highly impactful. All of the above. Yeah. No, there's a reason why we highlighted these. I think after you and I have talked about it a few times, but yeah, I think they all have value. They all allow you to look at the individual's capabilities a little bit differently, as they're all allowing you to see a different expression of that athlete's potential and where they're at. But the left in particular is useful. It's not used as often as I think it should be, because you are able to assess how that individual functions dynamically in all three planes with changes of direction and different levels. The shark skill test is another one. It's easy and simple to use. The nice thing about most of these is they require very little equipment. You just need a little bit of space to be able to perform, and so their utility goes up quite a bit because of that.
Right. Now, with all these, do you find yourself, and again, I'm picking your brain here because I'm really curious on how you approach the return to performance aspect with the different organizations and individuals that you've worked with. But do you have, how different is the conversation that you have with the player and the coach or the other sports medicine staff when it comes to the results? How different is your communication when it comes to the results?
Well, sometimes it might not be a whole lot different. Depending on the athlete, there are certain athletes that are driven by data. They like to know the details. And so what you share with them may not be drastically different than what you might share with the other members on the team that are involved in the reconditioning and return to performance program. But then there are others who aren't as concerned with that. They just want to know, what your thoughts are. Do you feel, are they ready to go where they're at? What are some of the concerns that you have? And I think the most important thing is just being honest and, leverage the data, if you are using video or images, include them in that process, include that in your explanation. And, that way they know exactly where you're coming from. However, you don't want to instill, fear, or you don't want to influence an athlete's confidence either. If they're feeling really good and they don't really feel like there's a whole lot going on, you want to try to build and springboard off of that too. If they're feeling well and they're excited, you've got to temper that with the reality. If there is something that's awry, or if something isn't progressing the way that it should be. So if there's a disparity between maybe what the athlete's feeling and experiencing versus what the data is showing, you have to be able to temper that a bit and pull the reins in without completely shutting down the athlete in the process. So it's a balance. Every situation's different, but I've been fortunate that many of the individuals that I've worked with they're inquisitive. They like understanding where they're at. They welcome the data and the information, and then based on that, they understand the decision is an informed decision, and the recommendations that are being made are an informed recommendation. So, I don't know if that answered your question completely, but
it does.
Yeah. So, it's interesting just because you've worked in a similar capacity where, certain clients that I've had, I've had to be an advocate for the athlete as well, because, an organization's desires or plan might be slightly different than what may be most ideal for the athlete at a given time. And so, that's another area that you have to be mindful of, and that, ultimately, if you're representing the athlete and independently of an organization, you have to be able to advocate for them and what's best, but also understand where the organization and the staff there is coming from too, and be able to have a discussion that is based on the data. And that's where the assessments and the information that you gather are so important, because you're able to communicate that with the team. You're not just providing an opinion, you're providing them with statistics and with information that basically supports why you're making a recommendation, or you're sharing the perspective that you are.
Right. And just to kind of tag on to that, the idea of talking to a doctor, a physical therapist, where, if it's something like a knee, they're talking about, okay, our goal is 105 degrees of knee flexion, and, we're at 95. Okay, well, let's see what else we can do. So numbers do come up quite a bit, just because I think that that's their experience. And when you come from a world of, or you have to work with people that live in a world of protocols and, timelines. Okay, if we're talking about a 3-month rehab process, how can we get through the rehab process, or a 6-month rehab, or longer, depending on the injury? At what point do we start to do that handoff from rehab to modified reconditioning or return to performance programming, and then back into practice and play? So that's where the numbers tend to, can be wiggled with, I guess, well, as far as interpretation goes. But I love what you said about, sometimes you have to act on behalf of the player. And there's been times where, it's, they want to get in there and there's no obstacle in their way. Just tell me what I got to do and I'll do it. I just want to get back on the court. Let me play. But then sometimes you have to protect them from themselves, right? Because if they are the guy that's jumping and then you notice a discrepancy between how, landing on their right versus landing on their left, or they're in denial about some of the pain that they want to admit up to, as you're watching their face, as you're watching their compensation patterns as they evolve over the minutes that they play or minutes that they practice. Sometimes you do have to, you have to be an advocate for them on behalf of the organization, like you're saying, whether it's a school or a professional team. But sometimes you also have to, in my experience, protect them from themselves and say, hey, I'd love for you to jump, but here, let me show you the video of how you're landing. And this is, this is not going to end well if this is how you repeatedly perform that move. So I think it goes both ways when you're involved at that level. As far as you want them to do well, and you want, hey, your job, if it's possible, to tell the sports medicine or the coaching staff that this player is in better shape than you realize, right? Or they're progressing really well ahead of schedule, however you want to put it. But then there's also those times where it's like, yeah, they're doing well, they're hitting these parameters. However, they're also doing this. Like you and I talked offline a little bit about, player that, wants to play. However, their knees are, how their body reacts after practice, and some of the things that can happen after they go hard on the court, because if it's a matter of getting that starting position and they're that alpha and they want to compete, they want to get out there, sometimes you just have to say, hold on, man, let's take it easy. We'll get there. We just have to do these other steps, when it comes to that, Yeah.
And I think too, that's, what you said is appropriate and applicable to the programming piece as well, not just returning to play or getting back on the court, but when you're able to leverage video, let's say of the athlete jumping, and they are excited and eager to do more intense, more dynamic activities, but they can't control how well they land. As well as I do, one of the key elements is eccentric control and the lack thereof that many athletes possess, and that's an extremely critical component to the return to performance piece that's often overlooked. So when we look at, when we get into our sample program, it would be a phase 1 OPT program. When you focus on stabilization endurance, and you incorporate reactive and plyometric elements that emphasize the eccentric and isometric components of a particular exercise, that's drastically different than many return to performance programs. And so I think that's one area that kind of sets our approach apart from a more traditional environment. And so I think to your point, if you're able to demonstrate to the athlete, hey, look, every time you jump, this is what's happening. This is why we need to focus on these things. This is why I'm having you do this particular exercise in this particular manner, because when you go and jump on the court or you go and perform this particular activity, this is what's happening. And this is what contributed to what we're dealing with. This is what contributed to that in the first place. So, sorry, I lost my screen here, guys. Apologize. So with that, I mean, let's get into the programming, and basically what we want to highlight are some different strategies using the OPT model framework that you can implement as part of your return to performance process with a client or athlete. And so when you look at return to performance programming components, a critical piece is the movement health or movement preparation component. And so with that, that's where you would implement some of the self-care corrective exercise strategies, many of which we highlighted in our previous episodes. So based on the region of the body, foot, ankle, knee, lumbopelvic hip complex, or shoulders, there are specific corrective self-care strategies that could be implemented to help support the athlete returning from an injury in those particular regions. And then when you look at kind of preparing for activity, preparing for practice or sport, there's the dynamic functional warm-up process that would also incorporate some elements of corrective exercise, and then blending that into, preparation for the activity itself. And then Ken, when it comes to the performance programming, what are some of the components that we would focus on, or that we will focus on and cover?
Well, it's gonna change, right? The goals as you progress through someone's training program, you're gonna change focus from stability to strength and to power. Now, ultimately, you're progressing. Your athlete's body is going to determine the timeline, right? So, whatever, there's been plenty of times I've come up with the yearly plan, right? From a collegiate strength conditioning standpoint, one of my jobs was to come up with a plan for the team, and it's not that different when you're talking about expectations of you as a strength coach or personal trainer when you are working with an athlete who is a part of a team or an organization. Because one of the questions that they have is, okay, well, what's the plan? How are we going to get this person back on the field? They're a starter. This is their senior year. They want to get back into play. What are the chances of getting this person back healthier? Or the chances are good, but what's the timeline to get them in there? So ideally, to get from a level of stability, body control, to strength, now we're able to absorb and produce force. And then when we talk about power, what we're talking about is rapid force production, right? So, whatever the sport may be, but in this case, when we're talking about basketball, we got to get them, first of all, can they land well? And then, get them to go through the continuum to where they can jump and land explosively, especially if someone's knocking into them on the way up or on the way down, or if they have to be the one to react and get up there as quick as possible, especially in a more defensive role. So when we're talking about the execution of speed, agility, and quickness, which winds up being an important aspect of observing as a fitness professional or a strength coach, is how fast can they move, but how well can they move fast, winds up being the main themes of working with court sports or any sport for that matter when it comes to being on the court. So when you have to quickly accelerate, decelerate, stop, your body's in one position with your feet are pointing one direction, your torso is pointing another, and your arms are doing something else. Are you passing? Are you receiving? Are you bouncing? Are you jumping? Your progressions have to make sense when it comes to gradually and responsibly loading the body and the different needs that an athlete may need to move on the court. So when we talk about the program, and you guys, just so you know, the programs that we're talking about, it's going to be a phase 1 stabilization endurance, a strength endurance for a phase 2 through the OPT model, and then a phase 5, which is power. Now, you guys will be able to download this, so don't worry about if you're taking out a pen and paper and have to take notes. Just so you know that the sample workouts that we're going to discuss are going to be available to you after this webinar. So when we talk about the execution of a workout plan for stabilization, first of all, your warm up, in the best case scenario, you are doing something that is assessment driven, right? And as you said, Tony, this is going to reflect how you're moving, the things that you need to address as an individual to move well. And if you're in a team perspective, and basketball, volleyball, those are team things, team sports, where you're usually going to do some kind of team dynamic warm up. So here, as much as you can bleed in what you're going to do as a routine as a team, and you can kind of change it around or make some kind of regressed variation of that. So it feeds your purpose, but it also helps you, progress towards what you're going to do on an everyday basis with the group. But how you're going to address your overactive, your tighter areas that need the mobility where you have restriction, and how are you going to upregulate and activate those latent muscles, or the muscles that aren't doing their job as far as joint stability goes. So we're talking about rotator cuff, hip cuff, foot and ankle stability. Getting those to fire up and be active while they're going to be integrated into the rest of the system for your activity. But one of the things when it comes to return to performance, the speed, agility, and quickness, and this is where I want your input, Tony, is that when we're talking about speed, agility, and quickness, historically, when it comes to working with, athletic trainers or strength conditioning coaches, getting somebody back into play, a lot of times what I'll hear is, all right, we're going to do this drill. We're going to do a ladder drill, right? Speed ladder drill. And I want you to go at 40%, right? Or I want you to go to 50%. And that's how they'll grade the progression. Okay, this week we're going to go 50%. Next week we're going to go 75%. And then by the time it's time for you to get back into full practice and full play, that's when we go 95, 100%. Right. So with that, there are ways to build in stabilization versus, all right, you need to self-monitor. You need to somehow temper yourself so that you don't go so fast that you might get hurt. But I do want you to get into the motion of running and slight change of direction, and and we'll build up from there. What's been your experience from a speed, agility, and quickness standpoint? This is where the biggest gray area when it comes to return to performance has been speed, agility, and quickness when it comes to getting somebody. What's been your experience, Tony?
My experience in what regard, Ken?
Like so if a basketball player, let's say, has to, they're working on drills where it's maybe a lateral, catch and shoot. They might say, all right, just go 50%, kind of walk over there, just with a jogging pace, get over there. And that's what I'll see from a strength conditioning standpoint as well. Or even if you have the athletic trainer trying to do some kind of variation of a rehabilitative speed drill or a change of direction drill. What have you seen out there outside of, because that was one of my first experiences when it came to the collegiate environment, is 50%, 60%, 70, 90. They then now go full speed. They may be full of compensations, but they're faster than the first day that they stepped onto the court and busted out the speed ladder.
Sure. Yeah, I think it goes back to what we discussed with the symmetry index, limb symmetry index, and how, symmetry, while it's important, isn't always sufficient. And so, if you give an athlete a benchmark of 50%, they're likely going to try to push that. That's all subjective. And so it's hard to determine what their actual 50% intensity is unless you have some pre-injury benchmarks that you're trying to get back to. It's really hard to objectively determine, are they really going at 50%? Or are they going at 80%? But I think to your point, while you do need those objective metrics to determine if you're progressing, those can't be the only things that you're using to evaluate if somebody's ready to come back or not, or to what level they're ready to come back. Because going back to symmetry, and I apologize for taking a step back here, but I think it is relevant. That's assuming that the uninjured side is functioning at a high level too, right? So
right.
Just because you have symmetry, you could have two legs that are both not functioning optimally, even though they could be symmetrical to each other. So I think qualitatively looking at how the athlete is executing the drill, not just the intensity with which they're performing it, but how they're doing it is going to be extremely important. And that's something that I would tend to reiterate time and again with the individuals that I work with, is that you can't just go off of the numbers. You can't just go off of those intensity benchmarks. You have to look at the quality of what they're doing as well, because as they get into repatterning and reprogramming and through the reconditioning process, you have to ensure that they're grooving optimal movement patterns, which ultimately will translate to improved efficiency and improved performance. They don't always see that. It's something I heard a long time ago, and credit Alan Cosgrove for this, but he would always say, more isn't better, better is better. And so we have to kind of keep that mantra in mind, especially when you're dealing with someone who's eager to get after it and demonstrate progress that they are improving.
Right. Great points. Now, the one thing that is built into the OPT model, is when it comes to reactive or plyometric work is that when we're in the phase one, or the stabilization endurance phase, where the primary goal is the adaptation is stabilization. If we were just to do a regular plyometric, it would be a matter of, you do a squat jump to a hold, where the emphasis is on landing mechanics, right? Do they keep good posture, or do they excessively forward lean? Do the knees come in? Do the feet turn out? Do the feet collapse to an excessive amount? All those things are normal, but can they control the landing? So one of the things that you might have to add in there from a speed, agility, and quickness standpoint is building in that concept of, can you control the landing? So in an example of a speed ladder drill, and for higher level athletes, this is one of those things that they kind of cringe at when you tell them you have to, let's say it's a basic in, out. So I'm zigzagging across a lateral in, out. So I'm zigzagging across a speed ladder. So I might say, go left foot in, right foot in, and then as your left foot and your right foot step out of the ladder, I need you to stop and hold, right? You can transition at a nice moderate speed, but I need you to stop and hold, check your posture, check your hip position, hip, knee, and toe in line. Everything's pointing straight ahead. Then you zigzag to the right. Step, stop and hold. Step, stop and hold. And then the next progression from there might be something along the lines of, if you're going to zigzag, you would 2 feet in the ladder and then balance on the outside foot. So now I can build in a little deceleration, a little isometric hold and stabilize, and that'll give them an opportunity to stop for a second, feel where you are, evaluate what your hip situation is. It level or is it dropped, right? Or are you hiking? Is your shoulder, are your shoulders square, okay? Or are you rotating down, or are you flexed over? Right, while you're standing on that outside, or let's say in this example, it's your left leg where your hip, knee, and toe are in line. So then they would go through, let's say maybe a half a speed ladder at that point in time. So they'll just go in and out and then balance. The other way, in and out and balance. That way I can control. Again, you can't say, oh, you were going 80% instead of 50%. You can't call somebody out on something like that. But what I can objectively look at is, how are you decelerating? How are you controlling your body when you're supposed to be still, right? So as you transition, and I can count 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi for you to balance and hold, and that way we know that if we have nice upright posture, shoulders are level, hips are level, hip, knee, and toe are in alignment, you've got good integrity from the start. As you change direction, or do you collapse and kind of just mold your way to the next position, right? Or is this done under control to where now if I can stop, hold, stabilize, now can you accelerate and change direction with good integrity? So when it comes to the phase one speed, agility, and quickness is what we have to start to blend in it, because this is what they're going to build up to, right? So if we can build in a stabilization component, more of a stabilization tempo to it all, we're going to get the player to, to do a movement that looks, feels, smells like the sport, and that in and of itself can be pretty encouraging. And the fact that it's like, oh, okay, I am working my way back to performance. So when it comes to, flexibility, core balance, and reactive speed, agility, and quickness, and then the resistance training part, the SAQ is one of those components of the workout that, you're going to spend more time coaching up, put them in real life scenarios if you can, like holding the volleyball, holding the basketball, and adding some transitional movements as you're doing these drills. However, and this is where, we said it in one of our other webinars, is that, your ability to create a good program is only limited by your level of creativity, right? Because plenty of book smart people out there, a lot of content out there, but how are you going to put it together that's going to be encouraging to that athlete as far as, their level of confidence to get back to play?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, that's something that's lost oftentimes, especially as it relates to the OPT model and the experiences that I've had and that some colleagues of mine have had, and I know you've had them as well, in dealing with different organizations and teams in the process, is that, stabilization as an adaptation is more than just doing a couple different exercises that involve standing on one leg as part of a program. Right. If you're training for stabilization, every component in the program has got to have elements and follow some guidelines and variables that would elicit that adaptation. And I think that's why we see the tremendous results that we do, is because we're looking at the entire program. The program is more than the individual components, and so the sum is greater than the individual parts, right? And so I think that's where the concept of stability is lost. And so, it's a critical piece to the puzzle when you're trying to get an individual back. But you bring up a great point. From a programming standpoint, you can have the physical authenticity, you can have the biological authenticity. So when you look at the mechanical specificity of things, the metabolic specificity, but that behavioral component that can encourage the athlete, encourage the athlete's buy-in, where you incorporate patterns, movements, drills, props, and equipment that helps to mimic what they're trying to get back to is hugely important. And that creative element is a massive piece to getting the athlete, keeping the athlete engaged and enthusiastic about the process, and limit them getting discouraged along the way.
Right. And so, as a performance coach too, I mean, I love tossing the ball, right? Because there's a lot of other things I'd rather do. It's like, all right, here you go. You all right? You okay? Right. But if someone's doing, let's say that speed lateral, or maybe even a 4-cone drill where they're going forward, lateral, backward, and then lateral the other way, nothing's stopping you from, let's say, tossing them a volleyball, and while they're stopped or balanced on one leg, have them bump the ball back at you, right? Mm-hmm. So, it's challenging, it's fun, and then that's easily progressed where I'm going to give them these meatballs where it's going to be right in front of them. I'm not going to have too much going on in the beginning, but then I could serve it a little bit to the right. I could serve it a little bit to the left, and of course, they have to earn it, and that's the big thing is looking for these opportunities anywhere during the workout and the conditioning plan, an opportunity to say, hey, attaboy, attagirl, good job, nice work. I see you're working hard. What you're doing on your off days for me, it's really showing up here. Any opportunity you can get, you can grab onto and celebrate those successes, a pat on the back, good work, keep it up. And it also, like, what we're talking about here, just something that they can look forward to. But if it can look and smell and feel like their sport, volleyball, basketball, that's going to be encouraging, because we have to humanize the process. Again, what we talked about earlier is that they're not their MRI, they're not their last appointment, they're not their injury, and the big reason why people play things is just for that. It's because they play, right? And play is fun. If you have the opportunity to play well, high level of competition, it's our responsibilities to, as movement and fitness and strength professionals to get them there the safest we can, but make it as fun as possible. All right.
Yeah, for sure.
Moving on to.
So I think we have, I think we've got some programs up, right?
Yep.
So what we've done for you all is we've created some example programs, phase 1, phase 2, phase 5, and then mobility and dynamic conditioning type program that can be done on off days or prior to additional training sessions or practices, if you will. And so what we'll do is we'll just kind of go through each of these example programs. As Ken mentioned, they'll be available for you to download after this episode. So no need to try and scribble stuff down or take a bunch of screenshots. We got you covered there. And so as we go through each of these, we'll just kind of explain the rationale and the reasoning behind each of the exercise options. Understand, just like the OPT model is a framework, there's a lot of variability involved in these. And so, this is just one example of a way that you could incorporate this type of programming. And so don't look at this as, you're limited to what we're providing here, but hopefully the rationales that we provide give you some insight into why we put these together the way we did, but then also gives you an opportunity to leverage that same reasoning when you put your programs together and you decide on specific exercise techniques or drills. So with that, I think Greg's got the first one up. Ken, do you want to start talking through our phase 1 program?
Yep, let's talk about phase 1, or what we might call stabilization endurance, for those of you that are familiar with the optimum performance training model. So you'll see here that, in the warm-up, we have self-myofascial technique, however you want to address it, whether using a static foam roller or something along the lines of using vibration and percussion, like with the HyperIce Viper or the HyperVolt. Again, we put on here just the TFL, adductor magnus, lateral calf, and lats. And generally, when it comes to putting programs together, especially when it comes to enhancing mobility first before activity, just from an approach standpoint, I'll do something that addresses the lower leg, the hip, and the shoulder, right? And then depending on time, I might add on to that depending on what the athlete's needs are. So again, as a general warm-up, this is something that I might do. But again, any kind of assessment-based program for mobility is going to supersede anything that I might do from a general standpoint. The form of flexibility here is static, because if you're working with, pain, discomfort, not that we're really addressing pain, but if someone's coming back from a layoff, they're coming back from injury, they've had some time off, and pain might be an issue, but from a scope of practice standpoint, we're not here to address the pain or work on pain. But what we can do, again, assuming that there is approval, the physician, the physical therapist, the athletic trainer are involved in the process. It just gives you an idea of where not to go. So if it might seem aggravating, or if they say they're in a chronic 2 out of 10 on a pain scale, then if it becomes a 2.5 or a 3, now you know that if there's any adjustments to be made in their programming, that's where you're gonna back off and again respect what the body's telling you. So back to the point, static stretch, we're trying to improve range of motion, especially if they've been casted or if they've been in a sling, or if they've been immobile for a while. What we're really trying to do here is just improve flexibility for the purposes of increasing or improving range of motion where it's been assessed to be deficient. And then the next thing to do is get into activation. So here we're trying to upregulate those muscles that have not been doing what they're supposed to be doing, if you will. So especially when it comes to the assessment process, if I notice something like an excessive forward lean or excessive low back arch, arms falling forward, this is where I want to address those muscles to get them to do what they're supposed to do from a stabilization standpoint. So it's, in this case, we've addressed the lats. Let's say, for the sake of example, arms are falling forward, lats, maybe pec minor might be doing their thing to pull the arms down, but what are we doing to strengthen the muscles that are responsible for keeping shoulder integrity so I can have that arm go up into that overhead position, which is very important now if you're talking about a basketball player who needs to go overhead, or a volleyball player that needs to serve or spike or block, where their arms are definitely up in that position. So the idea now outside of exercise selection is to manage the acute variable so that we are focusing on stability, and we're trying to reinstill, if it's ever been there before, the idea of, can we control the body? Can we increase or improve postural endurance and neuromuscular control from that standpoint? So activation, when it comes to core balance, this is where that comes into play. And, athletes come from different backgrounds when it comes to what they consider core work. So in this phase, this is where we need to get them to hold still and work on those intrinsic stabilizers and give them the integrity that they may or may not have had before. So when we talk about everything leading up to now, flexibility, range of motion, and now core and balance, we're just trying to make sure that they can control their body. And something I've said before in another webinar is that if you can't control your body, how can you expect to control your opponent, right? So that I attribute to Coach David Zimba, one of the assistant coaches I worked with at Cal, who taught me that early on, and that's been one of the drivers. And how I explain that to an athlete, when we talk about explaining the program to an athlete, I tell them, if you can't control your body, how can you expect to control the guy on the other side of the ball, right? So any thoughts on that so far, Tony, with what we've done through the phase 1 program so far?
No, looks great. On the balance piece, I like the inclusion of the implement, whether it's a basketball or a volleyball. I think too, with some of those drills from a balance perspective, reaching in different directions, we have a lateral reach here, but you could also incorporate overhead reach, getting them to put the extremities into positions that they're going to encounter on the court. So again, going overhead, using the arms as drivers in different directions, and then you can see where they're most challenged, and that can give you insights into what you might need to continue to focus on with their programming. So again, we have a lateral reach, but play around with the different directions, the different amplitudes of movement, how far, how high, how wide they're reaching, to see where they have the most challenge, so you can continue to build on that over time.
Right. And again, just like core, balance is one of those things. Doing things on one leg, that's typically a lot of times not seen unless someone's in a rehabilitative situation. So balance, there's been plenty of times where I've worked with an athlete and their injured side, and we talked about this before, and that their injured side a lot of times looks better than the uninjured side post rehab, because it's the injured side that's gotten a lot of the love and attention and focus when it comes to the rehabilitative process, and it's the uninjured side, the side that hasn't been hurt, is the one that's been the most compromised. So it's an opportunity to not just close the gap between the injured and the non-injured, but overall just elevate the performance on both sides, right?
Mm-hmm.
So skill development, we talked about this already with SAQ, adding the pauses, giving them a moment to look at their body, check out their alignment, make corrections when it's necessary, but also like what we showed here with the single leg balance and the lateral reach with a ball, with a basketball or volleyball in hand. This is an opportunity again. They're starting to move in motions or using drills that they might have used with the team, but now it's an opportunity for us to, again, be creative, have a little fun, integrate a little bit of the sport in there as they're working their way back. And then once we've gotten the nervous system cooked up a little bit, now we can get into the resistance training. So, and this is the one part of the workout where I tend to get most resistance when it comes to working with athletes and coming back. Because one, you have a lot of reps. It's not the 6 reps, 8 reps that they're used to doing in a weight room. Now we're talking about 12, 15, 20 repetitions, slow, low intensity. They're holding the purple dumbbells, the light green, baby blue dumbbells, things that barely fit in their, it fits in the palm of their hand sometimes. And they're like, what do you want me to do with this, man? But again, this is the one where the conversation definitely needs to happen on why they're doing it. But I'll tell you what, there's been more than enough times where you take somebody through, let's say, a floor cobra or a ball cobra or a shoulder combo, and they're feeling muscles that they've never felt before, right? So when it comes to resistance training, things like regressed movements that encourage posture and awareness, proprioception, ball wall squat. Again, if someone needs to work on their postural integrity, that's going to be a big one. Push-ups with rotation, especially when you do that slow, that can be a burner, not just for the shoulders, but also for their trunk and their spine, especially if you're cueing them. Okay, tuck that butt under. Let's try and maintain more of a neutral hip, or get the hip up, or move the hip forward. Get your head back, chin in, and again, getting back into cueing. You don't want to put them in a position where now I'm harping on you on 8 different things. But if I can right size the exercise for you, there should be no more than 2 things that may need correction when it comes to the kinetic chain checkpoints that we are trying to keep in alignment depending on the exercise. But a lot of players, if they haven't done stabilization before, oftentimes their eyes are open when it comes to how intense a 2-pound dumbbell or no weights can be, especially when it comes to the slow, high rep intensities that we're looking at in this phase of training. What do you think, Tony?
Oh, absolutely. And oftentimes it's a great opportunity, and the athlete, once they experience it, they start to understand, they get it. Like, okay, they start to think, why can't I do this? This looks like a piece of cake. But as they start getting into the meat of the workout, they start experiencing what it's like to move at those slower tempos, maintaining proper alignment for those higher rep ranges. They start to realize, okay, well, these are areas that I should be able to do this. Why can't I? So let's take the time to get better and work on this. So often, with many of the athletes that are driven and thrive on that competitive element, they take it as a challenge and want to get better as a result of that when they aren't able to perform to the level that they think they should. And so, while you may encounter some resistance at first, over time, I think the athlete starts to realize how important it is and how impactful it can be on their performance in all aspects of what they're doing. And it's an opportunity, again, if you're doing this correctly and you're able to implement stabilization training as we're laying it out, you're enhancing that neuromuscular control, you're enhancing that athlete's efficiency. You're basically just taking the parking brake off for them. You're allowing their body to perform to the level that it's capable of by shoring up some of these areas in which they're deficient. And it's only going to set you up for greater success when we get into our phase, our strength and power-based programming. So yeah, it sucks. It's not fun for them, but they do start to, appreciate it once they experience the benefits of it.
Right. So the exercise selection that we've got here, just to kind of run through the exercises and, a quick bullet point on each is that, the ball wall squat, again, emphasis is on keeping a tall spine posture while they're learning to, ankle dorsiflex, hip flex with good integrity. And again, up to you if you want to throw a dumbbell in there, or maybe even do something like a curl and press as they're doing the ball wall squat. Push-up rotation, again, having the body rotate as a whole, the spine rotate as a whole, while kind of, they're thinking of it as a shoulder and upper body strengthening exercise. I look at this as a core and shoulder stability level of exercise, which again, whether you're playing volleyball, right, overhead shooting, you got to guard, you got to reach with basketball and volleyball as well. Having good extensibility through the anterior shoulder complex can be huge. Lunges from a multiplanar standpoint, again, nothing happens just in front of you. You got to go to the ball, you got to back up, go forward, move lateral, get out of someone's way, or get in someone's way. So you have to be able to get the hip to move in different directions, and the multiplanar lunge is awesome for that. I mean, we could have even picked a step up, a multiplanar step up, to be a part of this program. And then the ball dumbbell row. And this is, I love using the ball in a prone position because now you're engaging the whole posterior chain. If you're a volleyball player, especially, if you're waiting for that serve, you're flexed, you're in that ready position, and you're always hunched over. Right, basketball is the same thing. If you're the guy with the ball, you're the one, you're flexed over, you're addressing the ball, you're pushing somebody, or someone's pushing into you, and you're in that triple threat position. So from that vantage point, you're always flexed, you're always forward. So we're going to do what we can to get somebody to engage as much of that posterior chain as possible, right? And then with a single leg dumbbell curl and overhead press, any opportunity I can find to put a player on a single leg, I'm going to do it. So because a lot of times they're going to jump off of one leg and they're going to land on one leg, or they're going to stop, cut on one leg too. So any opportunity I can to sneak in a little bit of single leg work, that's what I'm going to do. Now, again, going back into why we might do a stabilization exercise, the other importance here is that this might be their go-to on an off day, so maybe something that they do after they play a game, right? Just because if they've traveled, they're fatigued, they're tired, they got a lot of playing time, or they're getting back into it. This might be how I deload or unload somebody off of a hectic travel schedule or a competition schedule. So, anything to add to that, Tony?
No, sir.
All right. So once somebody does, in an ideal situation, that can be compressed or that can be expanded based on how the athlete's performing. But then the next thing is strength endurance, which is one of my favorite phases because it's the phase where now they start to get some, they see the light at the end of the tunnel. They can see that, okay, things are starting to get juicy. I am starting to do movements that I'm more familiar with. I'm starting to do more exercises that the team is doing. And this is where, again, if you're not the strength coach and some other coach is responsible for the team, you want to find out what it is that they're doing because you can easily blend that into this phase of training. Now, as I'll kind of run through the warm up and the activation part, but here we're picking up the tempo. Still, we want to use some kind of self-myofascial technique. Just for the sake of variety, quad, adductor complex, calf complex, pecs instead of lats. A little variation. That can change on the daily. Activation is going to pick up a little bit more, where we go from a static stretch to more of an active stretch, where we're moving in a controlled motion into and out of the stretch position. And then the activation again is going to be more, a little bit faster. So with control, with a moderate tempo, we're going to move into and out of position. So as we're into this phase 2 strength endurance template that you guys will be able to download. Now, moderate speed for repetition. So we have the ball bridge, again, glute activation. We're getting off of the floor, something less, static as a, before we had it as a sideline straight leg raise to activate the glutes. Now we're getting the hips to move with a little bit more tempo, not too much, but lateral buck step up to balance, catch, and throw. So we're now incorporating more of a more progressive balance movement. So now adding catching and throwing. So now they have to absorb and then produce force as they catch the ball and then throw the ball. And quadruped reach and pull here, this is not anything you're going to really find in our textbooks today as of now, but reach and pull is just more of a, reach under and reach up as we're rotating through the trunk and the spine. And in this case, you're on a quadruped position. So it's a nice variation than, your arm opposite leg reaches or your bird dogs, as it might be called, but adding more of a little rotational component to it. And then as we move into, now that we've got things fired up, turned on, you're moving well, you have more range of motion, you have better control, postural endurance is there because you just finished phase 1 skill development. So now we can get more progressive with our speed, agility, and quickness routine. So repeat lateral squat jump. So instead of just doing, like, say, a lateral squat jump with a 2 to 3 second hold, now we are incorporating a little bit of rhythm. We're moving from one jump straight into the next with control. Again, it's not as fast as possible, but what we are looking for is good mechanics, good extension. Can you move rhythmically with the integrity that we're looking for you to land and jump with? Now here we have a lateral shuffle with a single leg pause. So again, we mentioned you can pause and balance on the outside leg. So there's still a little bit more of this. Now if we're looking at, say, maybe a set of cones that are 3 yards, 5 yards apart, I can add some speed and have that stop, balance and hold, add some speed, stop, and then, we can shorten that time of transition as long as they have good integrity when they're from cone to cone. And then if you're on a traditional basketball court, half court ladder. So now we can start to add some conditioning on here formally inside the workout. So that can be from baseline to free throw, baseline to 3-point line, back to baseline to half court. And those could be managed, right? A player that's just starting up with me, conditioning wise, I might just go baseline to free throw, baseline to the top of the key. And that might be the level of their shuttle run, if you will. But as they get more conditioned, I can definitely add more reps. I can have them go half court, and if I'm working on endurance, now I can start maybe even using the whole court, right? So, but if the goal, let's just say, is more change of direction, I can add in shorter incremental stop and goes in there. But if it's more conditioning, I can lengthen the amount of distance they're going to run between transitions. So when it comes to the strength conditioning plan, not only are we looking at mechanics, do they have good body control, but we also have to look at, okay, how are we preparing this athlete for their conditioning, right? Because if they start to get tired, they're breathing heavy, they're getting fatigued, right? It doesn't matter how much endurance and stability they have. They're tired, they're fatigued, they're not going to be there, they're not going to be able to focus. So it's also our job to get them into cardiorespiratory conditioning shape. So anything to add on to those first 3 components, Tony, of a phase 2?
Nope, Ken, you're doing great, man. I love it.
Thanks, Tony.
I will say, with some of these exercises, and I know this has been highlighted before, we're providing you with some recommended sets and reps. The intensity level should be commensurate with your athlete's abilities. So, looking at, let's say, the ball bridge, that doesn't always mean a body weight ball bridge. So, provided that the athlete is able to maintain proper alignment, they're able to execute the movement through the desired range of motion without compensation, that is an exercise that you can load externally with a dumbbell or a barbell or whatever implement you want to use, sandbag. So, just make sure that the intensity level is appropriate for the phase. In this case, if you're doing a ball bridge that's body weight, and you have 10 reps programmed, the athlete might be able to do 25 reps body weight, no problem. So just utilize your best judgment, but it is appropriate to externally load in some of these activation exercises based on the rep ranges that we're working with here. Some exercises certainly you're not going to be using much load, if any, but others you certainly can. So I just want to highlight that because sometimes we get that question with regard to some of our programming at NASM, and just because it's an activation exercise doesn't mean you can't load it.
Right. Yep. Great point. All right. So as we get into resistance training, this has been historically for the athletes that I've worked with, a great meeting ground, right? Because now you're giving me what I want and I'm giving you what you want when it comes to resistance training. So it's a place, it's our common ground where we can meet on what you like out of a workout and what I love giving, or giving you what you need out of a workout. So here we have the superset format as it's delivered. So you're going to take a like motion or a similar motion, and you're going to compound a strength exercise, a traditional strength exercise like a bench press or a front squat, or a seated, lat pull down, and then you're going to combine it with a stabilization exercise. So both exercises are going to reflect the tempos and the speeds and acute variables relative to that goal and purpose. So if it's a strength exercise, so in this case we've got a single arm dumbbell press, right? So here I want to go moderate speed. Good control, no pauses. It's just down and up with the dumbbell, and I am incorporating a little bit more core in that approach when it comes to this exercise. But then I'm going to immediately follow it up with a ball push-up. So in this example, I know it wasn't explained that specifically, but the intention is to put the hands on the ball. So free feet aren't braced against anything, but I do want the hands on the ball, and you are going to move as slow as you did in phase one with emphasis on the eccentric. So as my chest is lowering down to the ball, I'm lowering my body down to the ball. That's where I'm going to spend a little bit of time. I'm going to float there for a couple seconds. I'm going to have a strong push up, especially with athletes that have done the traditional barbell and dumbbell work. Following it up immediately with a slow stabilization-based exercise. A lot of times it's something that they've never done. So don't be surprised if whatever dumbbell weight you were using or whatever the intensity was for the first exercise, when you go back for the second or maybe even the third set, don't be surprised that you have to take down some weight. So decrease the intensity, because we're asking a certain level of intensity with integrity for the duration of that routine. So here, I know we didn't put any rest in there, but in the beginning of a workout program, just so I can cue them up, coach them up in between sets, I'm going to do more of what we call a horizontal formatted resistance training. So in this exercise selection, single arm dumbbell press immediately followed by a ball push-up. I might give them their 60 to 90 seconds in between so that I can coach them up, let them know where I'm looking for them to improve. It gives me a chance to adjust any weights we need to. So if they're doing a 45-pound dumbbell for a single arm dumbbell press, but their push-ups really took it out of them, then I might say, hey, let's go to a 35 or let's go to 25 and really focus on maintaining core stabilization, good integrity through the trunk as you press that dumbbell. Because there's been plenty of times somebody's done a bench press, starts off with what they usually do, or think they can do 315. Let's back it off for a second. Let's go 285, and bringing somebody down to 100 and 135 pounds is not uncommon, because there's a certain level of endurance that comes with this phase of training, especially if you haven't been has not been a routine that you've done before, or in the sequence that you've got it laid out. So I hope that makes sense, but this is again a great transitional phase from stabilization into strength, because you're combining both component adaptations, if you will, for that athlete. Anything to add on to that, Tony, as far as the overall vantage point of the phase 2 resistance training?
No, I agree. It's a bridge. It is one of the more, if not the most challenging phase of the OPT model, but one that offers tremendous benefits from not only a strength standpoint, but enhancing that stabilization and endurance.
Right. And overall, I mean, just to kind of get through this, and so we can talk about phase 5 a little bit, just know that, when we're talking about, especially basketball and volleyball, if you can incorporate, overhead position, so we have a lat pull down. I know not every facility has a lat pull down, but it's a way to get them to move in that overhead position, whether you're pulling or pressing. But any opportunity, again, you can find to get them in moving into multiple directions, whether if you have a cable set up and you're pulling from across the body or away from the body laterally, not just what traditional specialized equipment will do for you, just put everything in front of you. But if I can even just turn the body a little bit and get a different angle at which they're producing or reducing force is one of the things that we oftentimes forget. I mean, there's programs I've seen, from other strength coaches, and everything is this sagittal plane dominant. But if we're truly trying to give the athlete the integrity they need, we need to get them in the body positions, in this case overhead, but also rotation. So if they need to do a chest pass, they have to be able to turn and be strong and confident when they do go into those different positions. And then I know we didn't say it on the last phase 1 workout, but the cool down is going to follow the same format to where you can foam roll, stretch, percussion, vibration, and then follow with a static stretch. Okay. And again, and if at this point in time they still are incorporating some kind of self-care program, this might be an opportunity to do that, but be ready if your athlete's like, I'm not really feeling it right now because I just, put 45 minutes on the court and doing another 12, 15-minute routine. If it doesn't jive with them, they can do it later, they can do it the next day. But as long as we unload the body, right, and give them an opportunity to recover well with ideal body posture and position, the cool down is basically just as important as the warm up when it comes to somebody returning to play. Anything else on phase 2, Tony, that I'm missing?
No, that's it. Let's get into to phase 5.
Yeah, phase 5, power. Now, this is where things get really fun and interesting, and because things are moving fast, right? And hopefully they've earned the right to move fast. In when it comes to the speed, agility, and quickness that we've done through phase 1 and phase 2. Here, this is where it's going to be a really big part of the workout, because, they're throwing med balls, they're jumping, they're landing, and this can be one of the hairier parts as far as transitioning programs go. But for the most part, we're moving fast. They've earned their right. We wouldn't put them in phase 5 unless they've shown that they can do it safely and effectively. So when it comes to the warm up, this is where you can get into more of the dynamic. We're not trying to improve flexibility and range of motion, but if that is still part of your objective, then they would do it individualized assessment-based warm up before they get into the dynamic. So if they needed to do their more static range of motion work, active, and then into the dynamic, whereas as long as dynamic is where they end off, before they get into the routine, last thing you want to do is do a static stretch and then get them to run and jump and throw things, right? So they can still do their individual work and then get into the dynamics. So here, as an example, this is what we would call more of a walking warm up. So they might be going from from baseline towards midcourt for their warm-up routine. So as we would call it, a walking warm-up. So they do different patterns as they do their warm-up. So ankle grabs, knee hugs, basic hip mobility work, double touches, touching the ground, reaching up to the sky. And this comes in a million different forms when it comes to a team workout. Activation here, depending on how you've built out your workout routine, you may or may not need to put med ball work in or jump work in here, because it may already be baked into what you're going to do for the strength routine. But the idea is that we're trying to elevate the activation of the nervous system, right? So if someone's doing, in this case, as we've got it exemplified in this routine, med ball crunch and throw, they can do that off the ground. They can do that on a physio ball. But now we're activating the core quickly, right? We're getting the nervous system to fire quickly. Lateral jumps with stabilization. So this is a part of a balance progression. So now we go from landing mechanics in phase 1 to repeat jumps, and now we're working on single leg landing mechanics. When it comes to balance and stabilization, we're little to no movement in the stance leg, and then movement, flexion, extension, squatting, deadlift, hip hinging in strength, and now we are working on landing mechanics on the power phase of balance, which again, something that I don't see a whole lot in resistance training programs for a lot of sports, but it's something that will be a difference as far as your ability to activate the hip and the same side leg. And then we got here a little bit of bear crawling, and that's just to get a little rotation metabolically, get somebody upregulated a little bit, but get that counter rotation between the shoulders and the hips. That's why you'll see a lot of bear crawls or bear crawl variations throughout a 4-week program, especially in power. Skill development and plyometrics and speed, agility, and quickness. This is where, again, we're not handcuffing you as much as we did in the first one, but what we are looking to do is just to get you moving quickly. Basically, you're free to go, right? As far as when you're working out with a team, now we can go into that 90% to 100% intensity range. Still important to get in multiplanar movements, lateral, adding compound motions. Now we can do, say, lateral to vertical jump. So this could be a lateral shuffle with a vertical jump at the cones. So if we have a 3 or 5 foot separation between cones, we could shuffle, jump, land, lateral, shuffle, jump, land, as an example. Cone touches, and then we have half court ladders and shuffle. So this now we can go without adding any pauses, without adding any kind of single leg balance and reaches. Now we can just do a quick rapid response in transition from one landmark to the other. And then as we get into the resistance training, this workout does not last long at all, right? As you get into this other phase where we do incorporate a superset, if you will, but now instead of what we did in phase 2 where it was strength followed by stabilization, here it's strength, high intensity level of strength, where we're doing now 1 to 5 reps, immediately followed by an explosive movement. So in the example here, we have a dumbbell press. So it's 2 arms. There is no core focus anymore. It's just about how much weight can you push? How intense, how heavy can you go while still maintaining structural integrity? And then immediately following it up with an explosive movement. In this case, it's a medicine ball rotation chest pass, right? Both pushing motions. One's going to be in slightly different direction, but I'm going to go heavy. And then for the sake of having that post-action potentiation, now I'm going to use the nervous system and get it to learn how to move quickly and as fast as possible. So, and that's what makes this workout intense at the level of intensity that it is, because now we're strength followed by power And if there's anything a coach needs to do here is watch for posture and compensation. And because speed is the name of the game, as soon as my client starts to slow down, we're done, because how you did the last rep is what the brain remembers. So as soon as they start to compensate, as soon as they start to slow down, they're done. We're going to take a break, and then we're going to go into the next exercise. So resistance training here has a different meaning from the previous two examples that we've given you. What do you think, Tony?
Hey, sorry, gang. I've got my dog barking at a car in the background, so I had mute on.
I appreciate muting.
Yeah. No, it's fantastic. I agree. And there's Zoe again. Apologize, everyone. One of the things too, we've got the med ball rotation chest pass. You can incorporate different elements into these power exercises as well if you feel it's appropriate. Even as a lower, sometimes what we'll do with our athletes is, have them perform the chest pass on a single leg. If you want to incorporate a balance element there, and then progress them to a more dynamic power exercise. So a lot of latitude here, but this is a great phase of training, and I think one that most all clients and athletes love to be in, because they're in their element and they get to get after it a little bit. So love it. And that's all I got.
Yeah, I'll take it. I know it's we're getting a little deep into the clock here on this program, but hopefully our review of a phase 1, phase 2, and a phase 5 gives you an idea of how we would progress an athlete returning to performance, just from the standpoint that, again, it's not a traditional workout plan that you might see somebody do on their own, whereas traditionally you might see, okay, go 50%, 75%, and then go 100% when it comes to the intensity and the speed. But the idea here is that it's baked in. Those pauses, those stops, those yellow lights are built into the program, from stabilization to strength into power. But of course, if you're in power, if you've earned your way to that last phase of training, definitely it's green lights go. I mean, little to no restrictions, but you're always going to have, especially somebody that's returning back to performance, they may need to have that individualized need to address whatever it is that they're coming back from, to incorporate that strength, that power, and again, consider the whole person when it comes to what their demands are. So I mean, one thing we haven't talked about, Tony, is like position players. So if in volleyball, if you're in front, if you're right next to the net and you're blocking, that's your primary goal, versus someone who's like a libero and they're in the back court, or somebody who's a point guard or shooting guard versus a center. Mm-hmm. We have to respect the demands of the different positions regarding those two sports. So, and that, now you can get deeper into the weeds when it comes to, okay, how am I going to return this player to sport based on what their coach is expecting. Again, that goes back to earlier in this webinar where we talked about talking to the coaches, talking to the sports medicine staff on how we can get this person ready for how they're going to be used on the court. And then the last workout routine that you'll be able to download from us is what we call the self-care or dynamic warm-up. Is that what the title was, Tony? We changed it on.
Yeah, it's kind of a self mobility and dynamic conditioning routine, just something that could be done as more of a deload or unloading type session, where you're working on improving or maintaining mobility throughout the week. You're incorporating some myofascial techniques, some static stretching in the areas that need it, followed by some activation. And then you can incorporate kind of a graduated level of activity, but not so intense that it would be viewed as a high intensity workout in and of itself. So, basically, it's something that you could give the athlete or give your client to do on those off days that kind of takes them through that corrective process, inhibit, lengthen, activate, and then integration. So there are some dynamic elements, but it's not full intensity or something that's meant to be viewed as a workout, a traditional workout. It's just something that they can do to unload and maintain some of the qualities and elements that you're working on throughout the week, help get them prepared for subsequent sessions.
Right, and that example can take place in many forms. So it could be a travel day where they get off of the plane, they want to get a light exercise routine in there when they're at the hotel, or if they're at the, whatever the other arena is that they may be playing at. So it has multiple roles and purposes. So if like they're traveling and I'm not with them, here's something that I know it's not equipment intensive body weight stuff, but overall just gets you a chance to get the blood flowing, especially when you're trying to counter things like jet lag and you just want a better night's sleep. So that's something that depending on the needs of your athlete can be implemented in different ways. So I thought overall in looking at those 4 workout routine examples, I think that's a pretty comprehensive lineup when it comes to things that you can do or should be doing when you think about the progressions of your athlete from beginning to end when it comes to post rehab to performance.
And just one more thing to add there on each of those phases, because I can't remember if we've if we highlighted it or not. Talked about so many things, but generally, each phase, if you're following more of a linear approach, is going to be roughly 4 to 6 weeks. Obviously, you have to look at the timelines within which you have to work, but for optimal adaptations, that's kind of what we're looking for. And then as your athlete progresses and gets further along, you can get into more of a hybrid type programming or undulating type programming where you incorporate all 3 phases within a cycle, within a microcycle or weekly cycle, in order to continue to see micro adaptations and micro progressions in each of those specific domains. And so again, when you look at a plan, an annual plan, followed by a monthly plan, followed by a weekly plan, ultimately you'll have to decide how long you spend in each phase. You may not have the luxury of 4 to 6 weeks, it may be much less, but optimally that's kind of what we're looking at. And then with phase 5, sorry, Ken, did we highlight that I know it's a superset, but that the exercises are biomechanically similar to each other? Did you talk about that?
Yeah,
my dog might have been barking.
I think your dog was barking at the time.
Okay,
but
all right.
I did.
Cool. Perfect. All right. Well, with that, Greg, did we get any questions or feedback from the listeners and attendees that we need to address?
No questions that you need to address, but there were a lot of people that wanted to thank you guys for the great info and the thoroughness of it all. So thank you guys.
Yeah, Ken and I, we're all about the long form webinars here.
All right. So on that note, let's say we will be back in 2 weeks, and we are going to do a return to performance with field sports. So this is for soccer, lacrosse, field hockey. If you're on grass or turf, this is going to be the webinar for you. So as always, we appreciate you guys watching, and if you're still watching, thank you so much for hanging in there with us. But Tony, any closing statements or words?
No, I echo your sentiments. Thanks so much, everyone, for tuning in. Love the support, and if you have any questions, don't hesitate to leave them in the comment section below. Also, the programs that we reviewed will be made available to you for download. And Ken and I both have our contact info on those templates. So if you need to reach out to us in any way, our email address is on there, as well as our Instagram handles. So don't hesitate to to be in touch. And until next time, hope everyone has a great rest of their week, and we'll see you soon.
All right. Take care, everyone.
Take care.